Well, hello everyone. My name is Chris Detzel, and I am the Director of Customer Community and Engagement. Today we do have a special guest on the Reltio Community Show, Michael Burke. He is a Senior Director of AI and ML. Fairly new, huh, Michael? Like 6 months? Is
6 months. Yeah, just
okay.
about.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Today's topic, and this is going to be a little different, everyone, is around evolution of the data quality space. Instead of a presentation today, will just be me interviewing Michael Burke around the data quality space because there's lots of interest. And I'm excited about it. And I will open it up to others as well to ask questions. But I have about 9 questions ready to go. I will invite you after I give this, just these talk about these 3 slides, for you to open up your cameras if it's possible, your video. So thank you for coming to this one. Let me go to the next slide. So the rules of this show, it's pretty much the same as every show, but I will be relying on some of you to also ask questions as you have them. So please keep yourself on mute, use the chat to ask questions, or open up your microphone and ask. All questions will be asked by me, and then Community Show will be recorded and posted to the Reltio community as well. I am excited to say, June is super booked. It's pretty exciting. We do have the Data Quality Space show. We do have an upcoming release that we'll talk about on June 2nd. So if you haven't gone to community.reltio.com/events, go there to RSVP for all these. And then Michael Burke will be coming back on Wednesday, June 8th, to talk about real-time data quality within the product of Reltio. So that will be exciting, and that will be a presentation, but you can still ask questions. And then on the 23rd of June, we will have Chris Iloff talk more about how to build an MDM practice from ground up. So it's a little different than maybe what some of you are used to, but I'm certainly excited about that. All right. Well, now, by the way, if anybody wants to put their self on video, this is pretty much how we're going to look for today. No presentations, but I'm going to get this started by asking Michael his first question. And it's just really, tell us a little bit about yourself, background, how you came to work in machine learning, AI, and came to Reltio and those kinds of things.
Yeah. So first off, Chris, just thank you so much for having me on here. I really appreciate it. It's excited to get to share my experiences and my voice with others around the community. And I'm hoping to do a lot more of these moving forward. So I really appreciate you reaching out to me. As Chris mentioned, I've been here 6 months. I've been in the data space for about a decade, really moving between solving data problems for specific customers to then SaaS-based products, and then now into the MDM space. So new to the MDM space, but fascinated and excited to learn more about how it operates, the different types of data sets and engagements people are doing, and the data at scale. I started off learning machine learning about a decade ago. I was working on a white labeled contractor job, and I had my own small company back then. And we actually got the opportunity to do some data work for a presidential campaign. And we had kind of said, oh yeah, we can take care of that, no problem. And and started working through these social data sets and trying to understand how we could make sense of information. And that kind of led me to a few of my friends who are currently in the AI and ML space, advising me in the last minute on this contract on how to, really increase the insights and awareness of what was going on in that data set. And after that point on, I was hooked. I was like, this is the future. Everything is moving this way. Started taking classes and getting involved with the community. And the rest is history. I've been involved with data since then. There's just so much opportunity moving forward. And I think that although there is a huge hype curve right now in the AI ML space, I think there still is a lot of value that's untapped, especially in areas like MDM.
Thanks, Michael. So let's just get started with the first question. And I think that with a definition of data quality and why it's useful would be a really good question first, just because there probably could be some, different types of thinking around that. So what's your thinking of what is data quality and why is it useful?
So data quality is such an interesting space because the idea of what data quality is really is at the definition of the usage, right? And we have standardized metrics that we look at across all customers and all data sets, like fill rates or freshness or frequency analysis. But when you start to really dive in and think about what does quality mean for an individual customer, it really is dependent on what they're trying to get out of that data. And a good example would be email addresses, right? Email addresses can be used to validate a customer. They can be used to send out a marketing campaign. But just having a set of email addresses or contact information, is only useful if it's being applied in the right way. So, for example, a marketing campaign, quality might be actually engagements of those emails. So it could be that the data is good, but the quality of the data for that specific use case might have nothing to do with the information itself and much more about the customer. So I think it's a complicated question, Chris, but definitely, as we start to, and this is something that we're really pushing to explore more on my team, is really, how can we get a deeper understanding of what quality is? And how can we really dive in to teasing out what are the end use cases that people want to understand about their data, instead of just looking at that top level of, is their data in the system and does it look proper?
Great. And feel free, everyone, to kind of pipe in either a question or, what is it that you think data quality? Do you agree with Michael? Do you disagree? And if there are specific use cases, push them out in the chat. Why not? I mean, Michael wants to hear from you. So the other question is, how does traditional data quality differ from current trends? Maybe you can talk a little bit about what current trends are going on, and then how is it different?
Sure, yeah. So I think that when you think about data quality and where it originated, right? It was this space of verification before you shipped information into a production system. So a lot of the evolution of data quality has been, and even today, this is still used, this idea of loading your data, analyzing the quality of it once, and then pushing it into a production system and never looking at it again, right? I mean, I think this is a very common trend. People have an offline tool, they take a sample of the data, they look at that quality, and then they push it into a production system. With new trends in the way that data has evolved, like those standardized approaches to manually analyzing quality have just become very difficult, because the sheer amount of data that we have and the complexity of that data has become so great that it's really putting a lot of tax on the data storages to do that work manually. And also, data changes over time, right? Like, it is constantly evolving. And as data stewards, you have very little insight into what's happening upstream and also what's happening downstream. So, the idea of where things are heading is really this real-time proactive approach. And you saw this, in the early 2000s with tools like Splunk for log analysis. I think that, now in the data quality space, you're seeing a lot more of these types of tools emerge where they are proactively monitoring your data in real time, and they are making assessments and guidance and notifying these data stewards of issues or potential issues automatically, right? So no longer does the data steward have to search for the needle in the haystack, but there is this opportunity where they can get insights from intelligence to make decisions faster and maintain more.
So on the
I was just going to make a comment,
Yeah.
Chris, if I could just cut in here for a second.
Sure, go ahead.
Hey, thanks. So, Michael, this is it's pretty interesting, the comment you just made. So I'm on a project at Moderna. I just put a note into the chat where we're actually starting to use a data observability tool for monitoring purposes. We actually use it for both profiling initially, as you said, but also for monitoring now that we're in production. And we want to monitor those incoming files on a daily basis. And we get tons and tons and tons of files. And as you were saying, or alluding to, no human could possibly keep up with that tsunami of data that's coming in. But we definitely want to monitor it and make sure that the data quality that we initially saw on day one during the IDL is maintained. And we want to make sure there isn't any drift or outliers or anomalies that are starting to show up in the data down, after day one. So we're definitely using Telmi to do that and starting to see the results from it. So yeah, it's an interesting space. And Telmi, exactly as you said, uses AI, those outliers and anomalies.
Yeah, Kurt, and that's a great call out. I mean, I think that right now we're at a kind of conjuncture where all of these different things that were typically done separately, like observability or analyzing quality, and also cleansing, right, and organization and ETL, they're all kind of merging into this one unified real-time tool. And you can still seam separate things together, but especially with what AI and ML are driving as an output, you really need to have all of that done ahead of time, right? And things like model drift, and Chris, we're getting a little bit off topic here, but if you have data, underlying data that is running a production machine learning model, if that data changes, the model output doesn't necessarily change unless you're actively monitoring that. So this idea of data drift is that your model performance, it might look like your model's performing well, but it's actually doing something really bad on the back end, like misclassifying users or sending users down the wrong pipeline of recommendations. And I think that this is a space where, data scientists today are spending so much time, with their feature stores, updating and maintaining and tracking this variance to make sure that there aren't these downstream issues, right? And I think this is why observability is becoming the whole pipe, right? It no longer can just be, you do your data quality or you do your feature store and that's it. You have to monitor everything because there's so much volatility in a lot of these data sets that it really becomes a much more complex environment to manage.
So we do have a question. Thanks for that, Kurt and Michael. And I think I know how you want to reply to this, Michael, but how is Reltio looking at AI ML for its DQ platform? Any thoughts would be greatly appreciated. So maybe just touch on that because we are going to probably go more in detail on another show in a couple of weeks.
Yeah, so I promised Chris I would not talk too much about Reltio, right? We're really, the idea of this is to get the more of a thought leadership out. But I do think that there is a lot coming with AI and ML for Reltio, and especially in the data quality platform. We're really looking to take much more of a proactive stance on how we can identify and remediate issues within the platform. And I'll leave it at that for now.
Yeah, and please come in a couple of weeks because I think you guys are really going to like it. We're spending a lot of time and effort on the data quality piece over the next 6 months. What are the benefits of having both MDM and data quality in the same system?
Yeah, so I mean, this is huge, right? Your MDM is your golden records. It's your source of truth. And it should be one of these resources that you are actively monitoring and managing and protecting as you would any other high priority data set. And I think that, again, going back to what we were saying before, traditionally this hasn't been the case, right? It's been much more of kind of a legacy, analyze quality once, ingest, and set it and forget it, right? And with the variability in data, especially with, sometimes dozens or hundreds or even thousands of upstream data sources merging into this golden record, you have to have some sort of intelligence, and that real-time data quality, that proactive monitoring is the only way that you're going to be able to keep track of everything, right, in a concise and accountable manner. And just to add on to that, like, this isn't just about identifying problems with data at the MDM. right? This is also about, okay, what about attribution? Like, can we go back up the stream and tell those data source owners, hey, there's an issue, like something has gone wrong with your data set. And this level of kind of analysis, but also communication and shareability, it's huge, right? And I think that from our perspective, like we really want to focus on, and anyone should really be focusing on 3 areas, which is how can we communicate across these different departments, especially in larger enterprise companies? How can we improve the quality of our data? And how can we tell that story of how data is improving over time to all the other stakeholders, either upstream or downstream? How do we share that messaging? Data storage is they're kind of the unsung heroes. They do so much work, but yet very little of that makes it to the business stakeholder level, right? And all the business stakeholders hear about are the problems, So I see data quality really is a gateway to be able to tell a story about how you went on a journey, you made an investment, and you actually had an ROI at the end of it, which bettered the whole business for the long term.
So what are some of the areas that today's technology struggles with within data quality?
Yeah. So and I was mentioning this to you earlier, Chris. I love this quote from Clay Christensen that is, in California in the summer, there's an increase in both ice cream sales and forest fires, right? But that doesn't mean that people who are buying ice cream are starting fires. And I think that this is a really big common misconception, is that people find correlative trends in data and they are quick to jump to an action, especially once, if your company is a little bit further along in the life cycle of using machine learning and AI, there's a lot of pressure to drive a causal analysis of a finding, right? And this is a huge challenge, and it's not just in a data quality space, but also like those downstream consumers. Making decisions too quickly will often lead to compounded disasters later, right? And finding correlations in information and making critical business decisions on them really is something that needs to be thought out and broken down into multiple bits and pieces, before you can really start to generate those hypotheses of causality.
It seems like a hard problem to solve in a technology,
Yeah, I mean, causality is the golden problem to solve, right? And for most of us, if you can really get to that, you have a lever that is, an amazing amount of power and value within the organization, and being able to tweak that and guide users based off of those inferences is huge.
So does having more data mean I can generally answer the harder questions? So just throwing tons of data at it?
Yeah, so I think this is also a question that we get all the time, right? Throw more data at it, and you're bound to produce better results. And generally, that is the case, right? If you do have more data, you will start to normalize and get better insights. But that also is highly dependent on the quality of the data. If you're throwing bad data at a problem, or even data that's not really vetted, it a lot of times can introduce more errors, right? So I've seen this before. Large companies, they have an acquisition or something, and they say, "I'll merge all of this data. It's good data, came from this smaller organization," and you throw it in there, and you have all sorts of problems moving forward. And I think this is an area where we really need to stop and think about the downstream impacts when we add a new data source. And has that data been evaluated? Has it been vetted to meet the needs of our downstream stakeholders, right? And more often than not, there's pressure just to get it in. But I think this is an area where data quality and leveraging data quality could really become a useful asset to make that decision on whether or not those upstream source stakeholders really need to go back and kind of refine what they have before it gets merged into a golden record.
I just feel like you're setting us up for something, maybe in a couple of weeks. I don't know, but this is good. By the way, if anybody has questions, please speak up or push it in the chat. What are some of the common pitfalls data stewards run into when they are starting to improve data quality?
Yeah, so again, like data storage, having done a lot of data stored work in my past careers, you're under a lot of pressure, right? You have to kind of get stuff in and move quick, and nobody ever congratulates you for resolving a problem. It's always, what is the next fire that you're off to go solve? I think that one of the biggest issues is just moving too fast, right? Like sometimes slowing down and saying, is this the right long-term decision to merge this data? Is this the right tool to be enriching? Are there ways that we can validate this problem before we dive right into it and just start changing these golden records that we've spent so long curating and defending from the rest of the organization, and this high quality data source? Some folks really you just have to step on the brakes and just say, hold on, and kind of push back a little bit and validate those data sources before they get merged in. And I see that is something that's just a common pitfall, is people need to move fast and there's a pressure on the business, and being realistic and communicating that outward of the downstream effects is something that it's challenging to do, but it needs to be done at some level. And I see the data storage as a perfect gateway for that communication.
Really good question here. Kurt, go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, I was going to say on that point, Michael, it's a great point, really, because you have the initial data load, and the data stewards are tasked with looking for data quality problems and ensuring that data load, is defect free if possible. But then if there's, not enough pressure there, the pressure increases exponentially if you go into monitoring mode, which we've discovered, because in monitoring mode, now you've got this river of data that's flowing in constantly, right? And if a defect is noticed because of the monitoring tools, well, now you've really got a problem if you're a data steward, because the business wants the data in the tenant to figure out why the defect is there in the first place and then remediate it, right? Well, all the while the business is waiting for their records. So it's a big problem.
In a lot of larger companies, and we don't have to go deep into this today, but like it's a politicized ballgame, right? And transparency at the golden record can be a really difficult conversation to say, like, hey, this isn't the data storage job. Like, this needs to be solved upstream. And I think that point of communication is really challenging. And I think it's an area where having a really good observability or quality analysis tool can help with that attribution, to say, hey, the reason that we're experiencing these impacts is because of this source system. And we need those domain experts to go back and figure out what's wrong. So anyways, we can keep going, but yes, I completely agree. And having firsthand experience that, it is a challenge, right? And there is no silver bullet.
And I think it's more so not just huge companies. It's a lot of companies. It could be small companies, medium-sized companies. It's always, even in my line of business with the community and stuff, I'm always trying to tap different parts of the business to do certain things. And, I can't own everything, just like the data stewards and things like that can't own all those things. You have to have champions and things like that. Pretty good question here, actually. And I'm interested to see what Michael says. Are there any differentiators on any MDM platform, so data quality, ML, AI specific, that you're excited about?
Yeah. So, I mean, over the last 5 years, we've seen a huge influx in AI specific technology geared towards data quality, and not just in the MDM space and the CDP space, across the board. I think that having a tool is great, but at the end of the day, AI and ML are just a tool to be able to better communicate something that's going on within the business. And the area that I'm really excited about is this idea of getting better at storytelling and building better frameworks that enable you to communicate across the business and the lines of business on challenging issues, right? And this is coming back to the point I made earlier, but there's just so much that I feel like gets lost between the data steward and the individual engineer who's working on a complex problem, and the business stakeholders and the marketing team and the sales team And I see this kind of next level or next generation of data quality really emerging, where we're able to tell better stories. We're able to templatize certain use cases, for example, a marketing use case, and actually tell a better story of how the quality of the data coming in these golden records is leading to a success metric for that marketing campaign or for that. And to me, this next level or this next generation of technologies has these flywheels, right? So you run a marketing campaign, and all of a sudden, the email bounce rate or the open rate or the intent to purchase information comes back into that golden record, and you can actually reaffirm what is the quality of this data for a marketing campaign, right? If these users are doing what you'd like them to do, that could mean that those specific users are a high quality record, right? So not just looking at data quality as like we are managing the most complete, accurate version of a golden record or golden database, but also, are the individualized use cases receiving that same metric of quality downstream, right? And I think that when you're able to kind of traverse from source system all the way down to end customer expectations of data, that's when you really start to be able to see, okay, here are areas that we need to focus into, here are areas that we're doing well. And for these specific use cases, we're really driving a lot more success. And that's a plan of action that you can communicate to business stakeholders. You can tie ROI to it. It's really challenging to do, but I think that's where we're headed as an industry, is really having that consolidated view of a story for using information.
Yeah, and I want to go too out of my question here shortly, but there's some good questions here in the chat. Is there any framework Reltio has or in the pipeline for DQ framework before sending it to Reltio, rather than building nice dashboards after it, like null check for first name, and all you can ask customer to do is map attributes to customer wants to check? So most of the time, customers build their own, and Reltio provides a framework which customers can expand according to their structure or need.
Yeah, so great question. I think that there is a huge opportunity to explore more in that area, and I would say that there is a lot of very interesting things coming. Again, without diving too much into the roadmap today, there is a lot of very neat things coming. But to date, there are ways that you can send data back. It's a very manual process, right? Like you have to set it up, and it's individualized. I think that there are some really good use cases where you could leverage the integration hub and other tools to kind of automate more of that process. So great question. Yes, there are ways, and stay tuned. I think there will be more coming in the near future.
Great. How easy is it to extend the AI ML solution to not only to find the DQ issues, but even to go and fix the DQ issue without much intervention? That's a good one.
It's another great question. So when we talk about observability platforms, I think there is this next stage of being proactive, right? And there is an opportunity there, right? There definitely is. There's a realized value of saying, why does the data store need to spend hundreds of hours and write thousands of lines of code to create a solution for something that's simple, like an email enrichment, right? So it's a great question, and I think that it's there's a lot of opportunity there to do more.
Where do you see the data quality? Where do you see data quality heading? Where's kind of the future?
Yeah, so kind of alluding from the prior question, I think that over the course of the next several years, and it's already started, is this idea of using AI and ML to analyze the quality of data. And I think that we've already, that exists, that technology exists, and analyzing the quality of information and being able to do assessments is out there. I think the next step is really more about how can we make machines take more proactive, automated decisions on how to fix data, right? Or how to map it. Ontology mapping is a huge space. Is there a reason that we don't have a machine learning model that automatically identifies what a name is without any metadata? I think that's where we're headed, is if we have these foundational models that can look at your data and understand it, the next step is being able to leverage other sources of information and even be able to analyze the existing information to recommend improvements or even automate improvements.
So there's a question, and I'll put this in the chat though, is around kind of the current functionalities of data quality today and the future, what it's going to look like. Is there documentation? We actually have a release overview coming up next week, and we'll be covering some of that there, Rohit, and I'll send you the link to that directly. I think my last question, so if you guys have questions, please push them in the chat. And where does, and you kind of alluded to some of this during these questions, and I appreciate you doing that, because some of those questions that we came up with didn't focus in on that, but you pushed that in. But where does AI and ML play within the data quality space? What does that look like?
Yeah, so I think that you have your standardized things that most of the people on this call are probably aware of, but like frequency analysis and fill rates and being able to find pattern recognition, right? Like that's the first stage of how AI has moved its way into data quality. I think that the next pieces are a little bit more complicated, like ontology mapping. How do you, without looking at metadata, map F name to first name in two different data sources, right? How do you understand what a name is versus an address? Or even a data set or piece of data that's not undefined. Can you identify that or define it? So like this auto mapping and merging is a big piece. And then from the data quality perspective, being able to look beyond that and say, okay, what information do we know is available about these records, right? Like, are there sources that we have that we can automatically make a decision to pull that information in because we know it's meaningful to this golden record? I think you're going to see a lot more there in the coming years, and a lot less focus on, hey, build your connections to an enrichment service, or build your connections to DMB or wherever else, but just, hey, you have loaded in some data and here's some opportunities. Click if you want to add this information, or maybe just set a policy that says if you're over a certain confidence, merge this data together and we're certain that it's high quality. But I do think that rules and like the idea of quality rules and checks are only still going to exist in highly regulated areas where you need that certainty and you don't want to have opinions, or probabilistic decisions made on information.
I like that. You don't want to have opinions. Well, that's all the questions for today. I'm going to wait for a little bit. If you guys have other questions, it was a little bit different than usual. Just throwing in some thought leadership around the space of data quality. I thought Michael would be a really good fit for that, because that's his big focus over the next several months into probably the end of the year, I'm sure. So I'm excited that you came, Michael, and wanted to make sure that you had a chance to speak to everyone around that. So just as a reminder, we do have a release, a Reltio 2022.2 release overview next week. So we'll talk about, in addition to data quality, other features and functionalities that are coming out into Reltio. And then we do have a community show on real-time data quality, which Michael will go deep into some of the things that are coming out now, and then some of the future things that are coming out on data quality. And my hope is that maybe a demo, I don't know, that's a lot of pressure, but demos are always good. And then the last thing is we have a show coming out on the 23rd of June, how to build an MDM practice from ground up. Hope you can attend that. And we have some other things coming out, just haven't pushed it out on the calendar. I hope this was helpful to everyone. I don't see any other questions, Michael, so I think we're good on the questions.